With the help of Hashem, we are learning Yoma, Daf, Chav, Dalid. We are continuing to learn the sugya of Trumas Hadeshen, the separation of some ash from the top of the Mizbeach that is done daily. We learned yesterday a machloikis Tanoim, subsequently a machloikis Amoyroyim, Leshitas Rabbi Eliezer, right? Can a kohen balmum separate the ash? Does the kohen have to wear the dalit begodim when he is separating the ash or not? And we're going to continue today to learn, number one, what's the amount of ashes that have to be removed? We're going to continue to learn about this question: is it considered an avodah that has to be done by a kohen that's not blemished with dalid begodim, which leads into the next question, and that is that there is a klal that a zor means a stranger. A stranger generally means a non-kohen. It can actually also refer to a kohen that's, let's say, not wearing the big day kahuna. But let's use the word zor. If a stranger will come and do the avodah, first of all, he is violating a negative commandment. It says, "V'zor lo yikrav aleichem." On top of that, normally for violating a negative commandment, the punishment, if there is a punishment because there was a proper hasra'ah, there was a forewarning, is malchus. However, we know that a zor that does the avodah in the Beis HaMikdash is chayev misa. And by the way, chayev misa doesn't mean in a Sanhedrin, it means chayev misa b'dei shamayim. Will a zor taking off the deshen, doing the separation of the ashes, will that zor be chayev misa or not? Linked to, is it an avodah or not? Now the bulk of the daf is going to be a statement that Rav made, that there are only 4 categories of avodah for which we give the zor this maximum penalty of v'chiyuv misa. Not that a zor may do, God forbid, any other avodah, he may not, and he'll get malchus. But there are 4 cases where the punishment is even more severe, and that is misa. And we're not going to speak out on the intro what those 4 avodas are, but they're going to share a commonality, and that will be the whole topic today. That we differentiate between a avodah tama versus a non-avodah tama. The word avodah tama means a concluding service. A concluding service means that in this avodah, there is no avodah after it. Like, for example, when we offer up a korban, so there's shchita, which, by the way, shchita b'chlal is ksheira b'zor. But then you have Kabbalah, which can only be done by a kohen. If a non-kohen does the Kabbalah Saddam, he won't be chayiv misa. L'kula alma. Why? Because Kabbalah is not the concluding step. The Kabbalah is an avodah that still has an avodah after it, because then you have to do haylacha. What's the concluding avodas hadam? The zrika. So zrika is an avodah for which we say azor is going to be chayiv misa. That's criterion number 1. Criterion number 2 is that it has to be what we call a avodas matana, which means an avodah, a service of application, of giving, which is, for example, zrikas hadam. You are placing the dam, or throwing the dam, or pouring the dam, applying the dam on the walls of the mizbeach, to exclude what we will call the avodah of removal. Removing is not called giving. And indeed, that's why Rav clearly does not include Trumas Hadeshen as a avodah, that if a zor did it, he'll be chayev misa, even if we're going to say that Trumas Hadeshen is considered an avodah, and even if it has to be done by a kohen who's not blemished, and even if it has to be done with all of the dalit begodim, but it's not called a avodas matana, because you're not placing it, you are actually retrieving it, you are removing it. Levi, however, says that if a zor does the Trumas Hadeshen, he will be chayev misa. And that will be a bulk of the daf. Where did they get it from? In the various limudim. And on daf Chavdal Adamid Beis, we're going to go back to the Mishnah that said at the end that they would cast the lots 4 times during the day, every day, to divide the avodah amongst the various kohanim of that Beis Av, of that Mishmar. And the question will be, I get it, every day you have many things that have to be done. And the only way to prevent argument, machloikis, fighting, is by making a lottery. Gavaldik. Do the lottery once a day. If there are many things that have to be done, say that, do it all at the same time. Why was it done 4 times during the day? We're going to learn about whether the Kehanim wore, that's the question that we'll have to address. Did the Kehanim wear their big day Kodesh Did they have to all get dressed in their 4 big day kahuna to get into the circle? Or no, during the lottery they wore the big day choil, and only the lucky winners then wore the big day kodesh, and many, many more topics that are all connected. Again, coming back to the Trumas Hadeshen and to the Payosois. And let us start on the Avchav Dalet Amud Aleph. We left off at the end of the 8th line from the top of the Amud. Boi Rebbe Oven. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu Malachinu Shahar Kol Nidvari. Says the Gemara, Rabbi Oven inquired the following: Trumas Hadeshen bekamon. Trumas Hadeshen uzakshain. How much ash has to be removed? And listen to the 2 options in his inquiry. This will be something quite unusual. Normally when the Gemara has a boya, option A, option B, if it properly concludes it, if it resolves it, it's going to pick one of the 2 sides. Here we will see that the response to the inquiry will be not A, not B, but the SC. But the Rabbi Oven didn't even think about C, where he's focusing on 2 options. Option number 1 is mitrumas meiser alfinon. Do we compare trumas hadeshen to the mitzvah of trumas meiser? Why would we compare it to trumas meiser? In other words, when the Levi gets his 10%, the Levi has to separate from the meiser ishain an additional 10%. And like Rashi tells us 14 lines from the top of the Amud, the inquiry is based on the similarity of words that we have here in Parshas Tzav, as we read the psukim yesterday. Vehedim. Hedim means to separate, right? Truma. Hey, reish yud mem. We have by Trumas Meiser, the Torah uses the word, Rashi tells us in Parshas Koirach, v'harei moisem. Yeah, it's singular, it's in the plural, but you have the concept of separating, v'harei moisem mimenu. And the Levi has to separate, Rashi writes, echad ma'asara. And therefore, perhaps you have to remove 10% of the ash when you do the avoid of Trumas Hadeshen. Then you have in Rashi, you see on the side another girsa that maybe this other version is, no, separate 1% out of 100. Because the Trumas Meiser, the 10% that the Levi separates from what he receives, is really 1% compared to the entire pile. Because it's 10 from 10. Maybe that's what, these are the 2 versions in this side. Or back in the Gemara, in Parshas Matos, when we successfully waged war against the Midianites, that's the and after we returned with the booty of the war. So the Torah says, and here again we have the words V'harei moisa, V'hedim. And so when it came to dividing the people that were captured, so the Torah says, Echad nefesh mechamesh hameis, 1 out of 500. So let's even go with the other girsa of Rashi that we have on the side. So his inquiry was, is it 1/500th, or is it only 1%? Which is substantially more, 5 times more. These are the 2 sides of his inquiry, all not based on the seichel dika comparison, but to the word comparison. Vehedim by Trumas Hadeshen. Do we compare it to the V'harei moisam Trumas Meiser, or to the word V'harei moisa mechas lashem? So Tashema responds the Gemara that we have a brayso that was taught by Rabbi Chia, the Tani Rabbi Chia. Nemar kan, it says here in Trumas Hadeshen the words Vehedim. And now V'nemar lahalon, we are going to the beginning of, it says right after in Tzav, the next pasuk, which is really also the next parsha. After the mitzvah of Trumas Hadeshen, after the mitzvah of Hitzoas Hadeshen, the Torah says, Zois Toiras HaMincha. The Torah goes back in Parshas Tzav to speak about pratim of the korbanos. And when it comes to a mincha carbon coming from a Yisrael, so it says, Vehedim mimenu bekumtzai, which is that the kohen offering the mincha has to separate from the flour offering a koimetz that is burnt on the mizbeach. Now the way Tosfos points out, here it's an exact match. It's not vehedim to v'hari moisem, not vehedim to v'hari moisa, vehedim. Something that we keep on learning. That first of all, even though we don't really need for the words of the Gezerah Shava to match the Chitzonius, if the content is the same. Remember the whole din of a Mitzvah, that the Ubah HaKoyen, the Shav HaKoyen, but that's if you don't have another option. But if you have various options of what to compare it to, we also are looking for the precise match in the semantics and the words. So where do we find the exact word Vehedim Imenu? By a Karbe Mincha. And how much does the kohen remove from the mincha the idea of a koimetz? A koimetz is not a fistful, but it's the amount of flour that fits under the three fingers, which is the index finger, the middle finger, and the pinky finger. The kohen would actually use his thumb and his pinky to make sure that no additional flour is protruding from. Only that which fits inside the koimetz, even though it's loosely translated as a fistful. Okay, so afkan bekumtzai. How much ash has to be removed? Not a percent. Not a percent. I don't care if the tapuach is until the heavens, 300 kur, or if there's very little ash. Always the same, a koimetz. Now Rashi points out, hold on, the ashes are burning hot. We don't expect the kohen to put his hand in there. So unlike by the mincha, where the koimetz was dafka a koimetz, not more nor less, Rashi says the answer here must mean not less than the koimetz. It doesn't mean not more than the koimetz, because how would you do the kemitza? And that's something that you can see with your eyes. When you take a shovel, this time it was a few koimetz amounts. As long as you have the amount of a koimetz that's being removed daily, then you fulfilled the mitzvah. Okay. And the rest stays on the mizbeach. And again, there's a machlokas really, the Rambam, if I'm not mistaken, we should remember the Rambam. The Rambam writes that it was also removed every day, I think. The Hoitzoas Hadeshen was removed every day. There is such a sheet in the Rishonim, but Chanochitas, Rashi, no, we don't. Trumas Hadeshen is daily, and then they dafke would leave the ash. They wanted the ash to pile up. It would just make this avoida a lot more time consuming, because then he wouldn't only remove the shovelful, he would be mesader the marach. If you have a lot of ash, you would have to move it into one pile, and you have to make room for the other pyres. And we'll learn later in Yoma, there were 3 pyres, there were 4 pyres on top of the mizbeach. So you made a seder over there, but you left the ashes so people should see that it's being used. Okay, Gavaldik. Now obviously there's a deep significance in comparing it to a koimetz, and I would suggest maybe that the whole daf today, the first topic that we're going to learn now, as to will azar be chayav misa, and even the last topic that we're going to learn, do the Kohanim wear big day kodesh when they made the piyus? I understand all of this to mean, like we mentioned, that removing of the ash could be viewed as only a preliminary avodah, because it's like a sur mirah. You're taking off, it's like you're cleaning. Many people view the avodah as doing something positive. You're offering to God something. It's like cleaning your house before the guest comes, cleaning it up. Is that achmas sarchim? Yeah, I don't know. You can view it with a lesser chashivus eye, which is why there is a debate whether you have to wear the dalad begadim, whether you don't have to wear the dalad begadim, right? Everything that we learned about yesterday, and I think that will be the underlying theme. Do you need to have a kohen? Can it be a balmum? In other words, is the avoida of sur meirah something that demands a kohen or not? Even though a kohen is isha chesed. Again, you're not doing anything, you're just removing dirt. Connecting it to a koimetz is like an avoida. It gives it more avoida characteristic. It gives a step of sur meirah a greater chashivus. L'chayda, that's the underlying theme of everything we'll learn about today, but let's go. Let's dive in over here. Okay. So Nachamal, what did we learn until now? Machloikis, do you have to wear the dalad begadim or not? Right. Then we learned Lirabe Eliezer, can a kohen balmum do the trumas hadeshen? This sugya is based on the opinions that hold that you have to wear the dalad begadim. It cannot be done by a kohen balmum. In other words, it's more avoida like. Nevertheless, if a non-kohen did the trumas hadeshen according to Rav, he will not be chayav misa. Not because it's not an avoida. Because many avoidas, if they are done by a zor, will not be a sin for which you're chayav misa. A non-kohen doing the avodah is always violating God's will. He's always violating a lav. If there is no chayav misa, he'll get malchus. But this maximum penalty of chayav misa, says Rav, only arba avodah zor chayav alei misa. And he's going to give 4. Now these 4 are very inclusive avodas. It's more than 4, but they have to fall into the categories of the 4. Zrika, throwing of the dam, Now, Zika is throwing of the dam. Zika is going to be applying the dam of a korban oif, squeezing the dam on the walls of the mizbeach. Haktara, burning. Burning, mamash, includes many things, right? Burning includes burning the chalavim and the ivarim. Burning includes, let's say, burning will include burning the ketayris. Think about it. Many things will be included in the burning. Number 3 and 4 are very specific. The pouring of the water. Now, the Nisuch Hamayim was only done 7 days a year. Right, in addition to the pouring of the wine, they would also pour water by the Korbanos Tzibur, Nisuch HaMayim, and the Nisuch HaYayin. Only for these 4 avodas do we say that if a non-Kohen, normally translated, loosely translated, a non-Kohen, a Levi, a Yisrael, really it even can mean a Kohen if a Kohen is not wearing the big day kahuna. He's called a Zar. He's going to be Chayv Misa B'dei Shamayim. Only for these 4. Levi adds one more. That's why it's connected here. Levi says, Af Trumas Hadeshen. I agree with Rav plus Trumas Hadeshen. Both Rav and Levi subscribe, you have to wear Dalad Begadim, because if you don't even have to wear the Dalad Begadim, then no one would say Chayv Misa. Right? We just said that a Zor is defined by a coin that's wearing the Dalad Begadim. So you have to wear the Dalad. If you have to wear the Dalad Begadim, let's go further. It can't be a kohen balmum. Yet Rav says he won't be chayav misa, and the question is why. And v'chein tani Levi b'masnisei. Levi didn't only say this as his own shita, but Levi had a brisa that's recording the opinion of a Tana that also added this trumas hadeshen. Now, the fact that there is such a brisa b'chlal is not a problem to Rav, because Rav Tanahu upalik. Furthermore, we will see on Amid Beis that there is a brisa that actually substantiates Shitas Rav. Now, my Tamad Rav, why wouldn't, this is not only about Trumas Hadeshen. If the Torah writes a few times, V'zor lo yikrav, and we learn that the punishment is Misa, so why are we separating these 4 from all else? So the Chsiv, this is a pasuk in Koirach, because it says that Va'ata uvanecha itcha, you Aaron and your sons, your descendants with you, Tishmeru eskonaschem, you should safeguard your priesthood. Safeguarding in this context means don't allow anyone who's not a kohen to do the avodah. Now, for what? It doesn't say stam avodah. So listen to these statements. L'chol dvar mizbeach, right? Regarding all matters of the altar. Now, that's a very broad statement. That should include a lot more, but wait. Ulemi beis laporoiches, and to that which happens within the curtain, this is referring to that which happens in the Holy of Holies, right, on Yom Kippur. And va'avadetem, and you should serve. But what? Avoidas matana etenes kunaschem. I have presented you with kahuna, right, as a service that you should view that it's a gift. That's the pshat. In other words, when a person is being tasked with a job, some people can say, wow, what a burden. So here the pshat is God is saying, no, all of this, that only you can do it and make sure no one else does it, all of that is a gift for you. That's the pshat. However, and now the pasuk says, that's where you have the punishment of Misa. Without these words, like I mentioned, you have the words, V'zor lo yikrav aleichem. There are other times where God says, don't allow a non-kohen to come close even. So normally, if he will come close, he violated the negative commandment, he's chayiv malchus. But here it says, V'hazor hakarev, Yumas. Yumas doesn't mean by the Sanhedrin, good, but it means he's chayiv misa b'dei shamayim. So says Rav, that when the God says that avoidas matana, listen to this drush, avoidas matana, that I have given you the service, avoida of application. For what avoida? Yechayev misa, and avoida of giving, of applying. V'loy avoida siluk, and not an avoida of removing. So by the way, that already excludes, we're going to see, cleaning out the lamps of the menorah. That's going to exclude automatically cleaning the top of the mizbeach, as we have dishun mizbeach hapnimi. That's going to include trumas hadeshen, even if it's an avoida. Koyin dalad bigodim, not a balmum, but you are removing. That's called avoida siluk, and the pasuk that writes yumas is only by avoidas matana, by a service of application. Okay, number 1. Number 2, criterion number 2, when it says va'avadetem, and you can see the pasuk here, right? It's almost like an extra word. The Torah says va'ata uvanecha itcha tishmerus kunaschem l'chol dvar mizbeach ulemi beis laparoiches. Skip the words va'avadetem. Just write avodas matana. Va'avadetem is a composite of two words. Avoida tamam. Avoida tama, a concluding service. The last step of an avoida. And avoida she'ein achrea avoida. V'lo avoida she'yesh achreim avoida. But there will not be a chiyuv misa by an avoida that taka has to be done by a kohen. A non-kohen will get malchus. He won't get misa. So, for example, when you receive the dam, it's not the end, it's not the concluding step, because the dam itself has to be put on the mizbeach. So after the Kabbalah, you need haylacha. If a non-kohen does haylacha, he won't be chayiv misa, because after the haylacha, you have to put it on the mizbeach. The putting it on the mizbeach, that's the avodah tamo. So there are many avodas in the Beis Hamikdash, but only some of them are the final step. The final step is the most chashuv step, for which you're chayiv misa if you're not a kohen. So these are the two criteriums. Very good. Avodas matana v'loy avodas siluk, and rule precondition number 2, a precondition to get the punishment. Precondition number 2 is that it cannot be an avoda sheyesh achra avoda. It must be a avoda tam. Now, if that's the case, trumas hadeshin should be excluded from chiyuv misa b'dei shamayim, because you are removing it from the altar. Even if you're going to say it's an avodah tama, you can say that way. You can even argue it's not an avodah tama because you still have ashes on the altar. But even if you're going to view it as, well, the removing the ashes of the altar is not connected, and especially by the fact that it doesn't need to be done every day. Trumas hadeshin is one-time thing. It's a concluding service, but it's removing. So why would Levi say that, yes, you are chayav me? So the Levi says, that the Torah adds the words l'chol devar hamizbeach. The emphasis is on the words kol. Why did the Torah have to bechlal write the words l'chol devar hamizbeach? That's to include anything that's done on the altar. Anything that's done on the altar. Now, normally, what is done on the altar? Zrikas hadam. That's already included. What is being added? Removing the ashes from the altar. It's devar hamizbeach. It's an altar matter. It's an inyan that's shaykh to the mizbeach. Virav, he says, no. Hahud, the Torah needed to write l'chol dvar mizbeach la'asuye, to add other types of zrikos, and that is sheva hazois bifnim. There are many korbanos chatos, a total of 5, whose dam was not applied on the outer altar. Its bloods needed to be brought inside. Now, inside can mean those 2 korbanos, the par and the soir of Yom Kippur. The blood goes lefnai v'lefnim. We're going to learn about that later. So they would sprinkle the dam, achas lamayla v'sheva lamata, in the kodesh hakachim. Then they would sprinkle the dam towards the paroiches 7 times. Then they would put the dam on the 4 corners of the inner altar. Then they would put the dam 7 times on the top teharish al mizbeach. We're going to learn later how many a lot of blood applications, all done inside. You have other korbanos bifnim that are not brought on Yom Kippur. They're not brought inside the Holy of Holies. But the Rashi reminds us, you have the Pad Helam Davar. Right, if certain times certain people do sins, then the blood of that carbon communal chatos is brought inside. You have the mitzoira, which is that the asham of the mitzoira comes along with a loig of oil, and that oil has to be applied either towards the inside, or it's mashma from Rashi that the kohen would actually enter the heichal and throw the oil towards the curtain 7 times. But be that as it may, there are certain avodas that are done not by applying the dam to the mizbeach, but to applying the dam lefnim. And if not for the Torah adding the words l'chol devar hamizbeach, since they don't go on the outer altar, one might have thought that if a non-kohen does it, he won't be chayav misa. So Rav uses the extra l'chol devar hamizbeach to add those cases. Now, just to be mindful that there's another issue over here, and that is that if a non-kohen goes inside the heichel, that in itself brings about the chiyuv misa b'dei shamayim. So why do we have to include these steps when anyways you went inside? And the general answer will be is that if a person did not know that they may not enter inside, if there is a shoygig regarding the entering lifnim, then you won't be chayiv misa b'dei shamayim, which is a technical thing. But still, you'll be chayiv misa by you throwing the dam when you know only a kohen should do it. Let's go by it. And says the Gemara, and what about Levi? Levi says I can learn both. That the Torah nafkalei, it could have says devar hamizbeach, The whole thing is extra. The Devar HaMizbeach includes the Shava Hazoy Shebafnim, the oil of the Mitzvah, but the words V'chol, enough extra, that's coming to include the Trumas HaDeshen, the removing of the Deshen. It's not Matana, but it's on the Mizbeach. And V'rav, Dover, V'chol Dover, Loi Dorish. Okay. Now the Gemara asks a question on Levi, a broad question. From the Midrash, Shahatoid and the Dreshes, we have the concept of when the Torah is first very general. There's a generalization, there's a klal, and then the Torah gives a prat, a specification, then the specification limits the generalization. So how can Levi be more inclusive, even l'chol dvar hamizbeach, which is a klal, from which he learns even the Trumas HaDeshen, fragt die Gemara ve'ema, l'chol dvar hamizbeach is a klal. And you're right, l'chol dvar hamizbeach should have included even Trumas HaDeshen, that if a zor does it, the zor will be chayiv misa. But then the Torah says avodas matana. This rule, not the pshat that you should know kohanim that the whole kohun is a gift. No, the drush avodas matana means a service of application is written after the Torah writes l'chol dvar hamizbeach. It's kabaldik. So how can you include other things for which is a chiyuv misa from l'chol dvar hamizbeach if Hashem later gave a prat? And so what do we have? We have a prat. So we have a klal and a prat. And the rule is ein b'chlal elo amachu b'prat. And that is, what is the avodas matana? Avodas matana, only a service of application for that if a non-kohen will do it, it'll be chayv misa b'dei shamayim. Avodas siluk, a avoid of removal, trumas hadeshen loy. So answers the Gemara, all this is in Levi, that if you only would have had those words, you're right. But since our markra daf chavdal tam beis, ulimi beis la paroiches, va'avadetem. Again, why did the Torah specify that which is done inside the curtain? Inside the curtain to teach you that only el mi beis la paroiches. You're right, there's a klal and a prat. You're right that avodas matana excludes avodas siluk. Where do we make that exclusion? Only lefnai v'lefnim, even according to Levi. That means if a non-kohen removes something from the Holy of Holies, for example, we already spoke out that one of the important steps is for the kohen gadol, not like the tzedukim, to bring in the shovel of coal and to bring in the ladle of ketoides, and only inside the kodesh hakodshim did he place the ketoides on the coals, and the coals were not in his hand; the coals were in the shovel on the ground. Now, at some point later, someone needed to remove that shovel of coals after the ketoid is burnt. Mamash asiluk. Same question. What happens if a non-kohen entered the Holy of Holies? Now here again, for entering the Holy of Holies, correct. But he entered there b'shoigig, or he entered there not through the usual door. He went in through a side door. No, even if someone entered in a way where for the entry there is no chiyuv b'dei shamayim, and a zar removed the shovel, he won't be chayv misa b'dei shamayim. You needed to remove the shovel, avodah siluk. In other words, we limit. We don't broaden. We accept avodas matana, but the avodas matana only goes to that which is done mibeis laparoiches. Who the avodas matana? Yes, chayv misa. So if a zar brings the ketoides, is chayv misa b'dei shamayim, and we say v'lo avodas siluk. If a non-kohen removes the shovel from the Holy of Holies, he won't be chayv misa. But this limitation, that only when there's avodas matana yechayev misa, is only taka mibeis laparoiches. Ha bachutz, but that which is done on the outer altar, coming back to the trumas hadeshen, afilu avodas siluk. Levi holds, yes, a non-kohen will be chayev misa b'dei shamayim. So asks the Gemara, hold on, we learned two criteriums from this pasuk: avodas matana and avodah tama. Avodah tama means that any step that's not the concluding step, no chiyuv misa. Why don't we limit that also to only within the curtain? The concept of avodah tama, Nabi, why don't we say only el mi beis laparoiches? Who the avodah tama? And if it won't be an avodah tama, v'lo avodah sheish achrei avodah. Correct? Let's exclude that. However, which would mean, let's say, what will be an avodah tama of lefnai v'lefnim? Taka, putting it on the ketoides, putting the ketoides on the coals. That's the end. For that is chayiv. But any step prior to that, for just bringing it in there, he won't be chayiv misa. Because he didn't, even if he brought in the shovel of the coals, even if he brought in the ketoides, it's not tama. Ha bachutz, but why don't we say that anything that's done outside, afilu avodah sheish achra avodah, like for example, I don't know, the kohen a zor was mekabel the dam, he should be chayiv misa. I
thought only a worthy person could go in the Holy of Holies, or anybody else would automatically,
Very good, 100%. So there's a few things over here. So if a person who's unworthy went in there, we just mentioned, just for entering, you're liable to death. Very good, Baruch. But what were to happen if someone who entered into the Holy of Holies, just for example, did not know that he was not allowed to enter? Didn't know that. That means he violated entry b'shoigeg. Now only God, don't forget, this death is death in the hands of heavens. But there will be times that God would not put the person to death, because it was done inadvertently, without knowledge. However, if that person who didn't know he can't enter, but he knew that the avodah has to be done by kohanim, for the avodah there was a mazid, that's the question, will it be chayiv misa or not? But very good. We have to always understand all of these statements, that for some reason, for the entry itself, there's no issue of misa. Are you chayiv misa for the avodah? So back to the kasha, answers the Gemara, va'avadetem, since the Torah says the words va'avadetem, so we say, hader arvei kram. In other words, look inside the Rashi, the vav from the avadetem, the Rashi 10 lines from the top, the avadetem, le'inyan avodah tamam, the avodah tamam, which limits that if it's not an avodah tamam, you're not going to be chayiv misa. That limitation, that leniency is applied even to the avodah that's done by chutz. Why? Says Rashi, shahavav moisav le'inyan rishon. Avol avodas matana loy mahader ela mi beis laparoiches. Doesn't say ve avodas matana. It says avodas matana. Gavaldik. Ve avadetem. So the ve avadetem goes back beyond, before the words of beis laparoiches. We don't limit it to the within the curtain. That's all Levi. Masha'enkin, the concept of avodas matana v'loy avodas siluk, yes, but only mi beis laparoiches. Okay, done. Now says the Gemara, Boyi, Rava. Now that we established a shitas Levi, that if a kohen, non-kohen does the trumas hadesh, he's chayiv misa b'dei shamayim dvar mizbeach. If a kohen does the service of a non-kohen, remove something from the kodesh kachim. Again, Baruch, he entered there to remove the shovel. He didn't know that he's not allowed to remove it. He didn't know he's not allowed to enter. He went in there, b'shoigik. But he knew that anything that's being done should really be done by kohanim. For that there was a mazid. That we learned clearly that even Levi is moida, that the avodah of removing in the kodesh kachim, base lapar, inside the curtain, within the curtain, he will not be chayiv misa. He's excluded from chayiv misa. Avodas matana v'lo avodas siluk. Again, by the mizbeach, even siluk is also chiyav misa b'dei shamayim. The only area where Levi did not discuss was in the heichal itself. Do we compare the heichal now to bachutz? That's a chumrah. Anything that's removed from the heichal is also going to be a chiyav misa b'dei shamayim, and there's a lot of stuff to be removed. Like I mentioned, you have the ashes of the mizbeach, dishon mizbeach of the menorah. There are steps that you have to remove. Or do we say that the heichal is like the kodesh kachim? And even though the kohen should not, a non-kohen should not do it, he'll get malchus, but he won't be chayiv misa because it's not avodas matana. That's the question. Boy Rava, avodas silik beheichal mahu. Do we say lifnim midamin alei? Do we compare the heichal, which is called the kodesh, to the kodesh hakachim, to within the curtain, and therefore siluk won't bring a chiyuv misa, he'll be pater, or lachutz, according to Levi. Right? Levi used the base, the chol devar mizbeach. By the mizbeach, even removal is a problem. Oy lachutz midamin alei, and he will be chayiv. So Rava himself knew the answer. Hadar pashta, coming back to the vav, it says, it could have said mi base, but it says ulim mi base. Ulim mi base. It compares the kodesh not only to within the curtain. God meant anything inside. The kodesh is like the kodesh hakachim. So if a non-kohen were to remove anything from the kodesh, putting aside the issue that normally you're chayav misa only for entering the kodesh, but if for whatever reason there is no chayav misa for that, shoygeg, but you knowingly, non-kohen, you remove the ashes from the top of the golden altar, you won't be chayav misa b'dei shamayim. Because we applied the limitation of avodas matana, even according to Levi, even inside only the heichal proper. Now, elamato. Now says the Gemara, Zor shesider es hashulchan l'chayev. Let's go to Rav also. Placing something, putting something down, is something that you're not allowed to do. If your Zor does it, you're chayev misa. What happens if a non-kohen arranged the shulchan? He put down the lechem upon him. Now, who says he's not chayev? By the fact that Levi mentioned only the four that he mentioned, Zrika and Haktara, Nisu Chamayim, Nisu Chayayin, he didn't mention Siddur es HaShulchan, but why not? I'll tell you why this is a problem. This is an avodah of matana, right? You're placing the breads down, and l'choyre it's called an avodah tama. It's she'ein achrei avodah. How do we view the removing of the bread later? Is it an avodah or is it just to make room for the new bread? So the havamina is the mitzvah is to put it down there. Taking it off the table, that's just for the kahanim to make room for new. So the Gemara says, Idur Siddur Bazichen, that after you place the breads, you have to place the 2 spoons of the frankincense. That is considered the final step. The Bazichen are connected to the lechem. Frag the Gemara Siddur Bazichen, so why didn't Rav and Levi, but we're focusing on Rav, it's not 4. Why isn't placing the 2 spoons of frankincense something for which a Zor will be chayiv misa b'dei shamayim? L'choyra, it's avodas matana, and it's an avodah tama. It's an avodah she'ein achrei avodah. So the Gemara says, no, that we view the removing of the breads, we view the removing of the 2 spoons, that is a continuation of the avodah. Ikasiluk v'haktara. Now, removing is not going to be chayev misa. Let's go to Rav, because Rav has a rule always. Any step that is of removal, even if it's the final step, is not going to be chayev misa b'dei shamayim. Furthermore, even according, right, independent of the avodas matana versus avodas siluk, what's the end of all this? The burning of the bezichen on the mizbeach. Rav mentioned haktara. So yeah, the final step will be the burning of the bezichen. Rav mentioned haktara. Haktara is a very broad word. That's a word. Next, zor shesider es hamanoira. Why don't we say that if a zor, right, if he put, right, the hatavas haneiros, by putting the oil, by organizing the menorah, he should be chayev. So the Gemara says, no, it's not the final step. After he puts the oil, you got to put the wick. Okay, so why don't we say that if a non-kohen puts the wicks in, he'll be chayev? The Gemara says, no. I'm sorry, first the wick. First you have to clean out, you have to prepare the lamps, you have to put in the oil, you have to put in the wicks, then he would put in the oil. Okay, so nasan shema l'chayev. It's also not the end. What's the end? What's the tamus? The hadlaka. So why don't we say that if a zor was madlik the neiros, he'll be chayev misa? Now you'll be shocked, says the Gemara. So why don't we say he'd like lechayev? Comes the answer. I'll tell you why. Because hadlaka is b'chlal not called an avodah. Now there's a paradox here. Hadlaka is enough of a step that will make everything prior to the hadlaka not the tama. But since igniting a wick is something halachically insignificant, it's almost spontaneous, because what are you doing? You're bringing the coal, the source of the fire, near the wick. Ke'ilu, now that you brought that in close proximity, the wick became a light on its own. It's not called an avodah. It's not a work, it's insignificant. So it's enough of a step that makes everything prior to it not the final one. But since the hadlaka itself is not viewed as an act of service, we'll look at you're just bringing the coals near the wick, but the wick is spontaneously coming aflame. So you know what? It actually could be done by a non-kohen. Not only won't it be a chi of misa, it can be done by a non-kohen. Hadlaka, and the Rambam paskins that way. If you remember, by the first Hanukkah live The first time that we had the 4 satellites of Eretz Yisrael, the Kaisel Amarave, I think it was Russia, and we had one in France, maybe one was in Melbourne, the first time by the Rebbe. That was like an amazing, a miracle, and the Rebbe watched the menorah being lit over there in Moscow. So Mordechay spoke, and he quoted this din about how the whole world is united lighting the menorah, and he was saying, quoting this din, that hadlaka ksheira bezor. He was giving a bracha to the Rebbe that Mashiach should come then, and the Rebbe should light the menorah. The Rebbe is not a Kohen, hadlaka ksheira bezor. Now there's technical things, Baruch, like you asked. Let's go back. A non-Kohen cannot even enter the Heichel. And for that there's a chiv misa b'dei shamayim. So practically, what does that mean? So there's a whole to do about this. Either it means that if the menorah was removed, which it should not have been removed, but if someone removed it from the Heichel, then a non-Kohen can light it. Or if you have some sort of very long machshir that you are standing in Ezras Yisrael, and it goes all the way into the menorah, and you light it, it's 100% okay. Because hadlak is, a long crane. A gewaltige concept. Hadlak alav avodah. And the Gemara is challenging. What are you telling me? That lighting fire is insignificant? That's not true. When it comes to making sure that the fire on the altar remains lit, v'hatanya, when it says, and this is a pasuk in Vayikra, that only the kohen should be the one putting the fire on the altar, and says the Brais. So what are we talking about? Limet al hatzotzas alisa, that if you have it chips, what they did was is that if the fire in the pyre, let's say it was raining in Yerushalayim, and the fire was going out on the maracha. So I know that Bezman Bayis Rishon, we just learned this, that the fire of the lion was functioning. And the second bias, not only was it in the form of a dog, but it wasn't interacting, begashmias, with adding to the heat. So if the maracha is going out, they would take kindling chips, little pieces of wood that light very easily. The kohanim were the ones that needed to light that a fire and put it on the mizbeach. Shaloi tehei ela b'koyin kosher. Not only b'koyin kosher, but when the kohen is adding these chips to make sure that the fire on the mizbeach keeps on burning, it's called an avodah, which means kohen, which means you have to wear klei shadas. Klei shadas means the big day, the 4 big day kahuna. So why do we see that lighting something aflame is called an avodah? Because if it wouldn't be an avodah, then why would it have to be with a kohen? A kohen could do it, but why would he have to wear the daled begadim? So why are you telling me that the menorah's lighting is not called an avodah? We're learning the Gemara quickly. This is the superficial understanding that you can't compare the type of effort needed to make sure that the pyre remains alight, right? Me'inyan le'inyan, right? Those who have the schus of lighting the bonfires on Lag BaOmer. It's an avodah. It's not you just bring the fire. I tried that, it never lights. I need yakir there to schwitz, to put it on fire. It's nishpashet. So putting the pyre aflame, that's taken avodah. It's not something that takes a moment. But when you have the olive oil that's pure, and you have the menorah inside, and everything is calm, and all you need to do is to make the little wick go on fire, that's not called an avodah. Hatzosas alisa, says the Gemara, that's taken avodah. But even it's a significant effort. You have to know what you're doing. And when you do it, don't think you're going to be successful right away. Especially if it's damp. Imagine if it's raining and the fire has to be kept alight. It was a whole to-do. But hadlaka, we say it's considered not significant enough, so therefore it doesn't have to be done by a kohen. So Rav did not mention it. So let's go weiter. Let's go. If a zod is aside of the removing of the ash, you have to, like we said, you have to organize the tapuach. That's not removing. That should be avodah tama. So it's not done, because after he organized the maracha, the final step was he would put down the 2 logs of wood. 2 logs of words, Bezman Bayis Rishon, Bezman Bayis Sheni, many logs. That is the final Sidur HaMaracha. Okay, so the Gemara says, so why didn't Rav mention that if a non-Kohen does the Sidur Shnei Gezirim, it should be Chayiv Misa? So the Gemara says, no. How do you view putting the wood? Is putting the wood the final step? The whole pyre, according to one shita, is only a preliminary. It's in order to put down the limbs, the chalavim ve'evarim. And that's something that Rav mentioned. No, ikar sidur evarim. And that Rav mentioned by Haktorah. Now, by the way, says the Gemara, that's only Rav. But Rabbi Yechanan B'Taka would not agree with that. Rabbi Yechanan views the placing of the wood as a final step. In other words, we don't view the pyre as only the means to burn whatever is going to be offered to Hashem, so to say. No. Rabbi Yochanan says he's chayiv misa b'dei shamayim. It's an avoida tama, and it's an avoida smatana. And indeed, the Gemara says, here you finally found the machlokes. Ba'apligi, Mar Savar, Rabbi Yochanan holds that the placing of the wood is the concluding step. It means even if, God forbid, there wouldn't be a single carbon offered on a given day, right? That's one of the things, if I'm not mistaken, we mourn Yud Zayin B'Tammuz is because Batla Avodas HaTamid. Let's say there were no animals. Putting the wood in itself is considered an avodah. And Taka Rabbi Yochanan will say Azar is Chayiv Misa. But Umar, that's Rav, Umar Sover, no Lav Avodah Tamihi. Okay. And like we mentioned before, the fact that Levi had in a Braisa that there was a fifth avodah for which Azar is Chayiv Misa, af Trumas Hadeshen, that in itself is not the end of the world, because you can say Rav Tanahu Palik, but it's much better than that. The Gemara says now, I want you to know that this debate, whether Trumas Hadeshen is also a step for which Azar is Chayiv Misa, is a clear machlokes Tanoim, Tanya Kavasa de Rav, Tanya Kavasa de Levi. Now it's easy street. Tanya Kavasa de Rav, according to Braisa, Void Dois, Shazar Chayiv Aliyah Misa. Let's go through this Braisa. Zrika Saddam. And we're writing clearly, Bein Lefnim. Zika Saddam means on the outer altar. Lefnim will mean the times that they threw the dam inside the heichel towards the paroiches. Bein Lefnai veLefnim is the bloods, the pot and the sword that we'll learn about in Yoma that was thrown first in the Holy of Holies. Achas l'mayla v'sheva l'mata. Then v'hamasa b'chatas ha'oif, the sprinkling of the blood of a bird chatas that's done. A bird chatas is done in the lower part of the mizbeach. And v'hamamatza v'hamakter ba'oilas ha'oif, and the squeezing of the neck of the bird on the walls of the upper mizbeach, and the burning of the bird of an oila which is burnt. And v'hamanasach shleisha lugamayim, and v'shleisha luganyayin. So here this Braisa elaborated the four that we learned on Amud Aleph, but what did this Braisa not mention on purpose? The Braisa did not mention Trumas Hadeshen. Trumas Hadeshen is called Avoida Siluk. It can be Tama, it's Tama, but it's not Matana, it's Siluk. So clear. However, Tanya Kavas de Levi, Avoida Shazor Chayv Alei Misa, the first one mentioned is Hameda Mes Hadeshen, the removing of the Deshen. And this goes back to what we learned yesterday. Now, obviously, you just want to go back. This is predicated that Trumas Hadeshen is an avodah, which, as a given, it can only be done by a kohen, not even by a kohen balmum, and it certainly needs the daled begadim. And it's like any other avodah. And also, the sheva hazois bifnim, and like we mentioned, and the oil of the mitzayda. And v'hamala al gabe mizbech, anyone who brings something up on the altar, bein davar kasher, bein davar pasul. So if you remember that there are certain invalidations that if they already went up, im alu lo yerdu. It is regarding the im alu lo yerdu that the Braisa says that if a non-kohen brought that up, he'll be chayiv misa. Because if a non-kohen brought up something that even after it went up, because its invalidation happened outside the temple complex, you have to bring it down. That's not called an avodah. Okay, good. Bekitzer, we concluded the sugya of Trumas Hadeshen. We're going to come back to the just at the end of the shiur, but now the Bach is extremely important. There's two dots over here. The Gemara now is referring back to the end of the Mishnah on Daf Chav Beis. The Mishnah writes that 4 times a day, Arba Payasois Hayusham. And now the Gemara is asking, Lama Mafisim, why did they have to make lotteries? So the Gemara asks on the question, Lama Mafisim? Oh, Kida Amaran, there shouldn't be a machlokes. We saw what happened, even more in the Braisa, that when there wasn't a payas, so there was a race that caused terrible things to happen. No, it clarifies the Gemara the question, why would we not cast the lots only one time? But we didn't do it one time. We spread out the lotteries 4 times during the day. Why not do it all together in the morning? Amar Rabbi Yochanan, to stir up excitement in the Azara. This is such a gewaldige Musar Haskel. You know, a lottery, guys, is exciting, right? Prizes, right? So you don't do it once and get over with it. No, you do the avoid a little bit. Then there's another time during guys, another pious. And again, everyone gathered together with the hopes that they're going to win. It made a healthy, freilich, dike tumult that you dafka don't want to get over with it, you want to spread it out as much as you could. Shenemar, as it says in Tehillim, Asher Yachtov Namtik Soit, that together we will take sweet counsel. And then it says, Bebeis Elokim Nahalech Beragesh, that we're going to walk in the house of God, Beregesh, with excitement. We got to bring excitement into the shuls. So whatever it is that you're doing that makes everyone involved and excited and waiting in anticipation, don't get over with it. Adarabah, build it up, spread it out. Okay, next question. Bameh Mafisin, that will be the final question we're going to focus in on today. Bameh Mafisin means, did the Kohanim already have to wear the Dalet Big Day Kahuna, Big Day Kodesh, which means the winners were already ready to do the Avodah, and then the losers, so to say, would have to take off the Big Day Kahuna to put on Big Day Chayil, or the opposite, the Pius was done, the lottery was done when everyone was still wearing their mundane clothing. And only the ones that won the lottery, then did they get dressed into Big Day Kodesh.
Is there a consideration given to somebody who was doing a yard site or shloshim or something like that?
Okay, so just for the Chabad Darosh, so Baruch is asking, if someone had the yard site, would they respect that? I would say it depends on the group. Depends on the group. It could be that, because it boiled down not only to the Mishmar but to the Beis Av. It could be they had such an understanding. They were allowed to make such an understanding because the pious was not an inherent step. It was only to prevent machloikas. But if we understood each other and we says, no, whoever has yard site will get it, and then this guy had yard site for his father and his mother and his Zayda and his Baba from this side and for his wife's side and then for this Rebbe. You had these people that had so many yard sites. I'm sure sooner or later they said enough with the yard sites. But I don't think there would be a problem if there would be no machloikas. L'chayna. Okay. So this question, Big Day Kodesh, Big Day Chayil, Machloikas Amoyroim. And guys, we're going to continue with this tomorrow. Rav Nachman, Rav Sheshes. Pashit. Rav Nachman says, Big Day Chayil, Dafke. Then the ones who won would change their garments. Rav Sheshes says, no. Everyone went into Big Day Kodesh. Now, Rav Nachman, the first white line. Rav Nachman says, Big Day Chayil, what's his logic? Because the Amrad Big Day Kodesh, if everyone is already wearing Big Day Kodesh, listen to him. Ika Balei Zeroya is the Chomsiva of the. You're going to have people that are Chamasniks. They are people that take things by force. Since they are already dressed the Big Day Kodesh, they're going to not hear that they lost. They're going to right away do the Avodah. If a person who's doing something wrong, but if he still has to go and get dressed, by then he won't be able to do it. People will tell him, what are you doing? You lost. But like this, a person who's dishonest, he's already ready to do it, can just go and do it. He'll chap it. He'll chap the mitzvah. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? Well, you can look at it, that's because Kohanim were so, they wanted that badly to do the avodah. But they lost. Rav Sheshes says, no, they needed to eat Big Day Kodesh, because the Amar the Big Day Chayil. Because if they'll be wearing Big Day Chayil, look about the one who won. The one who won will be so excited to do it that he's going to run and do it. But he's still dressed with Big Day Chayil. Gavaldik. Because Agav Chavivusei Mikru V'avdi, he'll do the avodah in Big Day Chayil. And guys, that's the whole daf we learned. Zar doesn't only mean a non-kohen. A kohen that's not wearing the Big Day Kohen is called a zar. So like this, you know that the one who's going to win is going to be that excited, he's already ready to go. All you need to do is to get the number. Once you won, boom, he's doing the avodah. Now, so each one has a svara. Now let's go weiter. Amar Rav Nachman, I'll prove it to you. Right, I have a logic and you have a logic. So now what we do? Now we have to find a source. So his source is from a Tanach. That what? Rav Nachman says Big Day Chayil because it says in the Mishnah, this is a Mishnah in Talmud. Now it's not clear. Listen to what the Mishnah says. The Mishnah is speaking about the lottery happened. After the lottery happened, l'cho'ura, the ones who won the lottery, it sounds like now they needed to get dressed in the Big Day Kahuna. One of the offices we had in the Mishnah we learned was Pinchas HaMalbish, remember in Shkolim, the 15 offices? And as we also just learned that it wasn't just you grabbed any tunic, it needed to fit you. So there were people that helped you get dressed. You're the kohen, you're the prince. So it says, there were people called chazanim. A chazan here means an attendant. So they were given over. The winners were given over to the attendants. And what did the attendants help those? they would remove their choil garments. That's what it sounds like. They would remove their mundane garments. However, they would only leave on them their michnasayim, their breeches, etc., etc., etc. Now this detail is important. We'll get back to that in a moment. So my love, the pshat is that who were given over to the attendants? The ones that won the lottery. And what does it say in the Mishnah? That the chazanim would help them remove their weekday garments, which means that during the lottery they were wearing their weekday garment. That's a proof to Rav Nachman, which is really a kasha or a refutation on Absheshes. Says the Gemara, Amar Afun, no proof. No, you didn't understand the Mishnah in Talmud. The ones who did not win the lottery, since everyone already was dressed in Big Day Kodesh, the ones who did not win the lottery were given over to the attendants that would remove their clothing. And Hachinami Mistabra, says Rav Sheshes. Or says Rav Funa about Yehuda to Farem for Rav Sheshes. The Isla Kadaitech Ba'is Jakalopais, if we're talking speaking about the ones who won the lottery, and what? They were wearing Big Day Choil. And now they're being dressed with Big Day Kodesh. So you just read the words, the last words on Chavdal Dom and Beis. That they only left their breeches. Now we got a problem over here. So let's work this out. That means that they left their pants from Choil. They would change everything else. But that means then they have to wear 4 Big Day Kodesh. It means after they wore their tunic of Kedusha, then it's more tzanua. Then they would remove the michnasayim of Choil and they would put on the michnasayim of Kodesh. That's what it means, but that can't be, because then it will chap that the last Big Day Kodesh that they're putting on is the michnasayim. And the michnasayim has to be the first garment that they put on. V'hatanya, minayin shelo yehi davar kodem lo-michnasayim. The first of the 4 Big Day Kodesh must be the Michnasayim, because it says, we learned this yesterday, U'michnasay bad yu al besori. Remember, the al besori is extra. I know the al besori that we learned yesterday was from Tzav, but the same concept. That when there's only when he's unclothed, the first thing is the Michnasayim. So Adarabah, this is a raya that the Mishnah is like we interpreted, that the ones who did not win the pious, they were already dressed with the Big Day Kodesh. Now they were given over to the Chazanim for them to have their Big Day Kodesh removed. Now it's a kasha against Rav Nachman. So Ve'idach, Rav Nachman says, no, holy kasha. Let me tell you what happened. Rav Nachman holds they were wearing Big Day Choil. Everyone is wearing Big Day Choil. Only the ones who wore the pious were given over to the Chazanim. But what happened? Acha oidem aleim Big Day Choil. When they were still wearing Big Day Choil, first Malbishan Oise Michnasei Kodesh. The first thing that happened was the Kohen removed his breeches that are not holy, and he would put on the Michnasayim of Kodesh. Even before he removed his tunic. That answers everything. So now he's already wearing the Michnasayim of Kodesh. And now says the Mishnah that the Chazanim would remove everything else. They would not remove the Michnasayim. The Michnasayim already are of Kodesh. The Michnasayim of Kodesh is already on them. So it was first the Michnasayim and then everything else. In other words, according to Rav Nachman, it's not only that the Michnasayim was done the first, but it's almost done separately. It's like a separate step. You're wearing the Big Day Choil, you're putting on the Michnasayim Kodesh. Then you are removing the tunic of Choil, and then you're putting on the tunic and the hat and the gartel. I just see again the clothing over the Michnasayim. The garments have 2 purposes. Again, Sur Meirav Asei Toiv. It's about covering one's nakedness. Let's view this as like a Ki'ilu Asur Meirah. And it's also Machaper. The Michnasayim is Machaper on Gila Aroyas. And then you have the concept of begodim that are adding to your honor. And separating one from the other, according to Rav Nachman, is very similar to the previous topic of Trumas Hadeshin. Again, Trumas Hadeshin is like, is that an avodah or not? Or at least, a zor should not be chayiv misa, because you are removing something negative. And those who opine that a kohen has to do a dafka, v'chuli, they hold, let's say like this, that let's view the Trumas Hadeshin as Gevura Shebechesed. It's like an act of Gevura, but we need that. We need the Sur Meirah. And without that step of Sur Meirah, without cleaning our keli, there is no room for a higher level of godly light. And when Mashiach will come, we're going to paskin like Beis Shammai. When Mashiach will come, the Seder will be Sur Meirah and then Asei Toiv. That is of that great significance. That in itself is of significance. It's also the concept of Bitul. If Akerta say Toiv al pi Chasidus connects us, let's say, to the Oir Hamamali, Sur Mirah connects us to the Oir HaSoivev, that's the underlying theme of the entire daf. So we are in the middle of the Machlokes, Rav Nachman and Absheshes, Big Dechol, Big Dekoidish, to be continued, God willing, tomorrow.